we are going to look at completing the square. Here's our first question. X squared minus 12x plus 9. Your first inclination might be to try to factor this, but the problem is if we try to find two numbers that multiply to 9 and add to negative 12, we're not going to be able to. So factoring this normally won't work. So we're going to try completing the square instead. When you complete the square, you want to make sure that your equation is first in standard form. You have your squared term, then you have to the first power, and then you have your constant term. This constant term, we're going to go ahead and move to the other side so that we just have the pieces with the x on the left. So when you do that, leave a space, and I'll show you what that looks like. I subtract 9 from both sides to move that, so I have negative 9 on this side now. When you complete the square, you take your middle number right here, which in our case is negative 12. So we have negative 12. You divide that by 2, so that gives us negative 6. And then you square that value, which gives us 36. So you take your middle number, you divide by 2, and then you square. This 36 gets added right here and right here. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Now we've done this because this side now is a perfect square trinomial. We've completed that square. The good news for doing that is this will factor. And when it factors, remember how we had that negative 6 right here? It's going to come out to be x minus 6. See? And to the squared. If you were to FOIL this, you would get x squared minus 6x to give you minus 12x plus 36. So you've turned this into a perfect square. That's why it's called completing the square. So then on this side, we have negative 9 plus 36, which is going to give us 27. We can solve this down by next taking the square root of each side. The square and the square root will cancel, and that will give us x minus 6 equals the positive or negative square root of 27. We can finish solving for x by adding 6 to both sides. And there we go. So while we weren't able to factor it from the beginning, we are able to solve this equation by completing the square. Let's try again. Number 2. We have x squared plus 8x plus 14 equals 0. So the first step, we're going to move the 14 to the other side so we can complete the square on the x squared plus 8x portion. So that's going to give us x squared plus 8x plus, leave a blank, and then if we subtract 14 from both sides, we'll have negative 14 here. So then, same work as we did before. We take our middle number, which in this case is our positive 8. So we have a positive 8. We divide it by 2, which is going to give us 4. And then we square. 4 squared is 16. That 16 is what goes in our blank. And whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we'll go ahead and add 16 to both sides. Now we've completed the square right here. Remember that 4? So here we have x plus 4 squared equals negative 14 plus 16 gives us 2. We can solve this down by taking the square root of both sides. The square and the square root will cancel. We have x plus 4 equals the positive or negative square root of 2. Subtract 4 from both sides, and we get x equals positive or negative square root of 2 minus 4. Let's try again. Number 3. 3x squared plus 6x equals 15. So this one already has it's separated with the constant term and then the x terms, but it has that 3 coefficient, and we really don't want that there. So let's divide everything by 3 and get rid of that 3 coefficient. So if I divide everything by 3, we'll be left with x squared plus 2x. I need that blank right there, so I'm going to go ahead and draw it in. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So then we take our middle number, which in this case is 2. We divide it by 2 from right there, and that gives us 1. We square, and we get 1. So filling in that blank, we need a 1. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So I'll add 1 to both sides. Then, remember that 1 right there? When we take our middle number and divide by 2, that number is what goes right here. 5 plus 1 gives us 6. And we can take the square root of both sides. 2 and the square root cancel. X plus 1 equals the positive or negative square root of 6. Moving the 1 over, so we get x by itself. We get the positive or negative square root of 6 minus 1. Let's try one more. Number 4. So we have 2x squared minus 12x plus 20 equals 0. So same thing as before, let's divide by our 2 so that we don't have that piece. You could have moved the 20 over first, like it was in the last one. That wouldn't change anything. 0 divided by 2 is still 0. So we would divide everything by 2, but 0 divided by 2 is still 0. So then we have x squared minus 6x plus 10 equaling 0. I need to move that 10 over. So we have x squared minus 6x. Leave our blank. Equals, subtract 10 from both sides, that gives me negative 10. So then we can complete our square. So we take our middle number, which in this case is our negative 6. We divide it by 2, that's negative 3. We square, and that gives us 9. So when we start the next line, we know that we have right here that negative 3 goes right here, negative 3. Squared. Whoops, I forgot to write the 9. We put our 9 right here, and we put our 9 right there, from right here. And that equals negative 10 plus 9 is negative 1. Now the next step tells us to take the square root of both sides. But there should be red flags flying up in your mind because we cannot take the square root of a negative 1. So normally we would take the square root of both sides. We would cancel the square and the square root, but I cannot take the square root of a negative 1. So that means that there's no solution. So this one has no solution.